I never thought I'd receive a termination email after less than 2 weeks on the job. I also never imagined I'd be the reason a company would lose a $2 million contract overnight. But sometimes, the universe has a peculiar sense of justice. Sometimes, the person you dismiss as insignificant holds cards you never knew existed. And sometimes, those cards are worth exactly $2 million. My name is Grace Elwood. And at 32, I'd learned to navigate corporate America's glass ceilings with the precision of a tightrope walker. 2 weeks ago, I'd walked through the gleaming doors of Voltrix Dynamics in downtown Boston, my heels clicking against marble floors that reflected the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Another fresh start, another chance to prove myself, or so I thought. The position, internal communications specialist, wasn't my dream job, but it was a stepping stone. I'd spent the last decade climbing ladders in various media companies, always hitting that invisible barrier where merit met masculinity and lost. Still, I approached each new opportunity with cautious optimism, armed with my Northwestern degree, a portfolio of successful campaigns, and the stubborn belief that competence would eventually triumph over corporate politics. Voltrix Dynamics occupied 3 floors of a steel and glass tower overlooking the harbor. The office hummed with the particular energy of a company trying too hard to appear cutting edge. Exposed brick walls, collaborative spaces with names like Innovation Hub, and enough kombucha on tap to drown a small village. But beneath the startup aesthetic lay the same old power structures, dressed in designer suits and wielding executive titles like weapons. I met Brandon Kessler on my 3rd day. He swept into the communications department like a storm system, all sharp angles and sharper words. Mid-40s, with prematurely silver hair that he wore like a crown. Brandon had been brought in as the new creative director with a mandate to shake things up. His handshake was deliberately crushing, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "So you're the new girl," he said, scanning my resume with theatrical skepticism. "Lot of job hopping here. Commitment issues?" I maintained my professional smile, though my jaw tightened. "I prefer to think of it as diverse experience." He snorted. "That's what they all say." From that moment, every interaction felt like a test I was predetermined to fail. I arrived early, stayed late, and produced work that exceeded every brief. My first project, a comprehensive internal campaign for the company's sustainability initiative, was completed 3 days ahead of schedule. I'd coordinated with 6 departments, secured C-suite approval, and even caught a critical legal compliance issue that could have cost us thousands. None of it mattered. Brandon would publicly question my proposals in meetings, often interrupting mid-sentence. "Let me stop you there, sweetheart," he'd say, the endearment dripping with condescension. "Maybe we should hear from someone with more experience." He'd then turn to Marcus or Todd, junior associates who'd been there less than 6 months, and ask for their thoughts on my work. The breaking point came on day 12. We were presenting to the executive team about the Q3 communications strategy. I'd spent 40 hours preparing the deck, anticipating every question, backing every recommendation with data. As I stood before the conference room's smart screen, remote in hand, Brandon cut me off before I could finish my opening slide. "Actually," he said, standing up with calculated casualness, "I think we need to reconsider this entire approach. It's a bit amateur." He took the remote from my hand, his fingers lingering just long enough to make me recoil. "Why don't you take notes while I walk everyone through what we really need?" I stood there, blood rushing in my ears, watching him present my work as his own. The executives nodded along, impressed by his insights. When CFO Patricia Henley asked about the metrics I'd painstakingly compiled, Brandon smoothly replied, "My team put those together under my direction." My team, his direction. My 40 hours erased in 4 words. After the meeting, I found Brandon in his corner office, feet up on his desk, scotch in hand despite it being barely 3 p.m. "Brandon, we need to talk about what just happened." He didn't look up from his phone. "What happened is I saved your ass from embarrassing yourself and this department. That was my work, my research, my strategy. Now he looked up, his expression shifting to something darker. Your work? Honey, everything you do here is my work. That's how teams function. Though clearly, you're not much of a team player. That's not... You know what? He set down his scotch with deliberate force. This isn't working out. You're not a good fit for our culture. Too aggressive, too difficult. HR will be in touch. The email came within the hour. Effective immediately. Decision final. They'd mail my personal belongings. 12 days. That's all it took for Brandon Kessler to decide I was disposable. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that some people aren't as easy to throw away as they appear. The Uber ride home was a blur of Boston traffic and bitter thoughts. I sat in the back seat, cardboard box of desk items balanced on my lap, a sad collection of a succulent, my Northwestern mug, and the fountain pen my mother gave me when I landed my first job. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering if I was about to cry. I wasn't. I'd learned long ago that tears were a luxury professional women couldn't afford. My Beacon Hill apartment felt smaller than usual, its exposed brick walls closing in as I set the box on my kitchen counter. The termination email glowed on my phone screen, each word a fresh humiliation. Not aligned with company culture. Wish you the best in your future endeavors. Corporate speak for, you didn't play the game right. The calls started within hours. My former colleague Sarah texted first. Holy shit, Grace, I heard. That's so fucked up. Then Marcus, surprisingly. Brandon's an ass. Everyone knows you did that presentation. But knowing and doing something about it were different currencies in the corporate world. My mother called that evening, her voice carefully modulated in that way that meant she was trying not to sound disappointed. Well, darling, these things happen. Maybe it's a sign you should consider. Other options? Teaching, perhaps? Or that nonprofit position your father mentioned. Mom, I'm not giving up on my career because one asshole. Language, Grace. And I'm not saying give up. I'm saying maybe consider paths with less resistance. Less resistance, code 4, places where being a woman wouldn't be such an inconvenience. My best friend Jenna was more direct over wine that night. Sue them. That's textbook discrimination. With what proof? He was smart about it. Never put anything in writing. Always had witnesses when he criticized me. It's my word against the creative directors. So that's it? He wins? I stared at my wine, watching the light refract through the burgundy liquid. That's how it usually goes. But this time was different. This time, Brandon Kessler had unknowingly triggered something beyond a wrongful termination. He'd stepped on a landmine he didn't even know existed. My phone buzzed. Uncle Max. Gracie Bird. His gravelly voice filled my apartment through the speaker. Heard you had some trouble at the new job. I closed my eyes. Of course he knew. Max Elwood had eyes and ears everywhere in Boston's business community. It's fine, Uncle Max. These things happen. Do they? His tone was neutral, but I knew that measured quality. It was the same voice he used in board meetings when someone had grossly underestimated him. Tell me what happened, don't spare details. So I told him everything. Brandon's condescension, the stolen presentation, the humiliating dismissal. As I spoke, I could picture my uncle in his home office, probably still in his work clothes despite it being past 8. Bourbon in hand, those sharp gray eyes that missed nothing focused on some point in the middle distance. When I finished, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then, they know you're my niece? No. I'd been careful about that, as always. I'd built my career as Grace Elwood, letting people assume Elwood was common enough. I never mentioned that my uncle was Max Elwood of Helion Peak, the man who'd turned a small solar panel startup into a clean energy empire worth $2.8 billion. I never wanted to be another nepotism hire, another executive's relative playing at having a career. You sure? I used my mother's address on the application, Different emergency contact. There's no connection they could have made. Another pause, then a sound that might have been a chuckle. Brandon Kessler, creative director. Been there, what, 6 months? How did you? I make it my business to know who's who at our partner companies, Gracie, especially at firms that handle our communications contracts. My blood chilled. Uncle Max. Did you know Voltrix handles all of Helion Peak's East Coast PR? Beautiful contract. $2 million annually, with performance bonuses. We're actually up for renewal next month. I don't want you to... You don't want me to what? Make business decisions based on business factors? Because that's all this is. Grace, I don't do business with companies that don't share our values. And one of Helion Peak's core values is respect. For everyone. At every level. The weight of what he was suggesting settled over me like a cloak. They'll know it's because of me. Will they? Or will they know it's because their creative director created a hostile work environment that made me question their corporate culture? Because that's what my lawyers will be explaining when we terminate the contract. Uncle Max, the man stole your work, Grace. In my world, that's theft. And then he fired you for calling him on it. In my world, that's cowardice. I don't do business with thieves and cowards. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment's darkness, city lights painting patterns on the walls. Part of me wanted to call him back, to stop whatever wheels he'd already set in motion. The noble part, the part that still believed in fighting fair. But Brandon hadn't fought fair. None of them ever did. My phone lit up with a text from Sarah. Girl, Brandon's strutting around here like he just won the fucking Super Bowl. Actually bragging about trimming the fat from the department. Trimming the fat, is that what I was? I picked up my phone and scrolled to Uncle Max's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button. One word from me could stop this. One word could let Brandon keep his victory. I set the phone down and poured another glass of wine. Some victories came at too high a price. Brandon was about to learn that lesson. The hard way. Max Elwood wasn't born into power. He'd clawed his way up from a 2-bedroom ranch in industrial Ohio, where the air tasted like rust and ambition was considered a luxury most couldn't afford. At 67, he wore his success like armor, custom suits that cost more than most people's cars, a corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, and the kind of quiet authority that made CEOs twice his size listen when he spoke. I'd grown up watching him transform from Uncle Max who fixed my bike on weekends to Max Elwood, the man featured on Bloomberg covers. But to me, he was still the person who taught me chess at 8, insisting that every move had consequences, that thinking 3 steps ahead wasn't paranoia, it was survival. In business, Gracie, he'd said during one of our games when I was 15, everyone shows their character eventually. The smart ones show you who they are when they think nobody's watching. The stupid ones, they show you when they think they're untouchable. Those lessons shaped me more than any MBA could have. Max didn't just teach me about business, he taught me about power, how to recognize it, respect it, and when necessary, wield it. But he also taught me restraint. Power without principle is just bullying with a bigger budget, he'd say, which is why I'd never used our connection professionally. While my cousins flaunted the Elwood name, leveraging dinner party connections into corner offices, I chose the harder path. Every job interview, every promotion, every small victory. I'd earned them as Grace Elwood. Nobody special. The struggle was mine to own, even when it meant hitting glass ceilings so thick they might as well have been concrete. Max respected that choice, though I sometimes caught him watching me at family gatherings with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride mixed with something else. Frustration. Maybe. At watching me fight battles he could have eliminated with a phone call. The morning after my termination, I found myself at his Wellesley estate. The house sprawled across 5 acres of manicured perfection. But Max was where he always was at 6 a.m., in the kitchen, making coffee with the same methodical precision he applied to billion-dollar deals. You look tired, he said without turning around. Unemployed does that to a person. He snorted, sliding a mug across the marble island. You're not unemployed. You're between opportunities. Is that what we're calling it? Max turned then, and I saw it, that flash of something dangerous in his eyes. People who only knew Max Elwood, the philanthropist, the clean energy pioneer, the soft-spoken business leader, had never seen this version. This was the Max Elwood who'd survived hostile takeovers, who'd crushed competitors that underestimated him, who'd built an empire in an industry that didn't want him to succeed. "Tell me about Voltrix's culture," he said, settling onto a bar stool with his coffee. "What do you want to know?" "Everything, the politics, the players, the pressure points." So I told him. About the boys' club masquerading as a modern workplace. About how female employees mysteriously never made it past senior specialist roles. About the informal meetings at whiskey bars where real decisions were made. Meetings women were never quite invited to. About Brandon's predecessor, a woman who'd left after 6 months for personal reasons that everyone knew meant harassment no one would address. Max listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You know what Helion Peak's contract with Voltrix is worth to them?" $2 million annually. You mentioned 2.3, actually. But it's not just the money. We're their flagship client, the renewable energy leader that gives them credibility in the sustainability space. Lose us. And they lose more than revenue. They lose their calling card. "Uncle Max, I'm not doing this for you," he said. And for a moment, I believed him. "I'm doing this because I've spent 40 years building a company on the principle that talent matters more than politics. That respect isn't optional. That culture comes from the top down." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts with the casual efficiency of someone used to making decisions that moved markets. "Jim Hartley still CEO over there?" "Yes." "Good. Jim's smart. He'll understand the message." He paused, looking at me over his readers. "You sure they don't know you're my niece?" "Positive. I've been careful." A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "You know, your mother thinks I've been too hard on you kids, making you forge your own paths. Maybe she's right." "No," I said quickly. "You taught us to earn it. I don't regret that." "Even now?" "Especially now. Because when Brandon Kessler loses everything, it won't be because I'm Max Elwood's niece. It'll be because he's exactly the kind of executive you've spent your career standing against." Max raised his mug in a mock toast. "Spoken like an Elwood." He took a sip, then added, "Though technically, it'll be both." "What do you mean?" "I mean Brandon Kessler fired my niece without knowing she was my niece. That makes him unlucky. But he also created a toxic environment that violates every principle Helion Peak stands for. That makes him stupid." "And Gracie?" "Yeah? I've built a $2 billion empire on the bodies of stupid men who thought they were untouchable. One more won't even register." He said it casually, like discussing the weather. But I knew Max well enough to recognize the promise in those words. Brandon Kessler had just made the kind of enemy most people only encountered in nightmares, the kind with principles, patience, and more power than God in certain Boston boardrooms. "When?" I asked. Max glanced at his Patek Philippe. "Oh, I'd say Jim Hartley's Monday is about to get very interesting. Contract termination notices have a way of ruining the start of a week. That's in 3 days. Gives Brandon the weekend to enjoy his victory. I'm not heartless." But the smile that accompanied those words suggested otherwise. It was the same smile I'd seen him wear before hostile takeovers, before congressional testimonies that reshaped energy policy, before every carefully orchestrated move that reminded the world why Max Elwood was not a man you crossed lightly. Brandon Kessler thought he'd fired a nobody. He was about to learn that in Boston's interconnected business ecosystem, nobody was ever really nobody. Everyone was connected to someone, and sometimes that someone was the kind of person who could end your career with a phone call made over morning coffee. "More coffee?" Max asked, already reaching for the pot. "Sure," I said, settling in. "Something tells me this is going to be an interesting week." The war room was what Max called his home office, though it bore no resemblance to any home office I'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's gardens, But the view was secondary to the three monitors displaying real-time market data, contracts, and what looked like Voltrix Dynamics' latest quarterly report. Rachel, Max said into his phone, I need you and the legal team here within the hour. Yes, Saturday. Tell them it's a code 7. I raised an eyebrow. Code 7? Contract termination with prejudice, he explained, hanging up. We have 7 codes for different types of business actions. Helps the team prepare mentally. Within 45 minutes, Max's driveway filled with Teslas and hybrids. Even his lawyers drove the brand. Rachel Chen, Helion Peak's chief legal counsel, arrived first, followed by 2 junior associates and someone I recognized as David Park, head of corporate communications. Situation? Rachel asked, settling into one of the leather chairs arranged around Max's conference table. We're terminating the Voltrix contract, Max said simply. Full stop, effective Monday morning. The room went silent. Even I felt the weight of it. $2.3 million contracts didn't get canceled on a whim. Grounds? Rachel pulled out her tablet, already taking notes. Section 47B of our agreement, Corporate Culture Alignment Clause. One of the junior associates, a sharp-eyed woman named Monica, pulled up the contract on her laptop. That's aggressive. We'd need documented evidence of systematic cultural violations. Define systematic, Max said. Pattern of behavior that contradicts Helion Peak's stated values, particularly regarding workplace equality and ethical business practices. Max turned to me. Grace, tell them about the meeting. The one where your work was stolen. I recounted the presentation theft, keeping my voice clinical, professional. But as I spoke, I watched the lawyer's expressions shift from skepticism to interest. Was this documented? Rachel asked. I have the original presentation files, timestamps showing my work. Marcus Chen from the department texted me after, acknowledging that everyone knew it was my work. Marcus would testify to that? I don't know. He still works there. We'll subpoena if necessary, Rachel said, then paused. Wait, you're Grace Elwood, Max's niece. Max confirmed, which Voltrix doesn't know. Yet. The room crackled with new energy. David Park leaned forward. This changes the optics completely. They unknowingly terminated a key stakeholder's relative after stealing her intellectual property? The relationship is irrelevant, Max said sharply. We're not terminating because they fired my niece. We're terminating because their creative director's actions represent a culture antithetical to our values. The fact that his victim happened to be my family. That's just cosmic irony. Rachel was already typing. I'll need everything. Grace, emails, messages, any communication with Brandon Kessler or HR. Monica. Pull every public statement Voltrix has made about workplace equality. David, prepare for media response. This will leak. I want it to leak, Max said. After the termination notice is delivered, not before. The team worked with surgical precision. Within 2 hours, they'd assembled a dossier that painted a damning picture, not just of Brandon, but of Voltrix's entire leadership culture. Previous discrimination complaints swept under the rug, executive meetings held exclusively at private clubs. A leadership team that was 87% male in an industry where women made up 60% of the workforce. This is solid, Rachel concluded, but they'll fight. Claim we're retaliating for Grace. Let them, Max said. Discovery will be interesting. How many Brandons do you think we'll find in their ranks? David looked up from his laptop. Sir, there's something else. Voltrix just announced a major sustainability campaign for Q3. Our contract is the cornerstone. Without Helion Peak's endorsement, the whole initiative collapses. Stock implications. Conservative estimate, 8 to 12% drop. They've been trading on their green credentials, losing us. Destroys their narrative, Max finished. Good. Consequences should be meaningful. I watched this unfold with a mixture of awe and unease. This wasn't just about firing Brandon anymore. This was corporate warfare, executed with the cold precision of a military operation. Uncle Max, I said quietly. This feels bigger than one man's misogyny. He turned to me, and for a moment, the CEO mask slipped. Grace, do you know how many brilliant women I've watched leave this industry? How many times I've seen talent crushed by ego? Brandon Kessler isn't special. He's a symptom, and sometimes treating the disease requires aggressive intervention. Rachel closed her tablet. We'll have everything ready by Sunday night, Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. Jim Hartley gets the notice. Legal justification, immediate termination, and, she smiled slightly, a press release explaining our decision to seek partners who better align with our values. Include a quote from me, Max said. Something about how respect isn't negotiable. David, you'll know how to word it. The team dispersed as efficiently as they'd arrived, leaving Max and me alone in the war room. Outside, autumn was beginning to turn the gardens gold. You know what the beautiful part is? Max asked, pouring himself a scotch despite the early hour. What's that? Brandon Kessler will spend the rest of his career wondering how a junior employee he fired triggered this. He'll check your background, find nothing connecting us. He'll assume someone complained, but there's no paper trail. It'll eat at him, the not knowing. Unless someone tells him, Max smiled. Oh, eventually someone will. After he's lost his job, his reputation, his career trajectory, someone will mention at a bar or a conference that he fired Max Elwood's niece. And in that moment, he'll understand the real lesson. Which is that in business, like chess, you should know every piece on the board before you make your move. Brandon thought you were a pawn. He never considered you might be a queen. I thought about that as I drove home. In 2 days, Brandon Kessler's world would implode. Not because I'd asked for revenge, but because he'd revealed exactly who he was to exactly the wrong person. Max was right. Brandon had shown his character when he thought he was untouchable. Monday morning was going to be educational. Monday morning broke gray and drizzling over Boston. The kind of weather that made the financial district look like a scene from a noir film. I sat in my apartment, laptop open to Voltrix's internal communications portal. Sarah had shared her login, eager to keep me in the loop of what she called the best drama since the Christmas party incident of 2019. At exactly 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Uncle Max. Delivered. The first domino had fallen. By 8:07, Sarah's messages started flooding in. Holy shit. Emergency all hands just called. Jim looks like he's about to throw up. Brandon just ran past my desk white as a ghost. I opened Twitter, searching for Voltrix Dynamics. Nothing yet. The corporate world moved fast, but not that fast. The real avalanche would come once Helion Peak's press release hit the wires at 9 a.m. My phone rang. Marcus. Grace, what the fuck did you do? Good morning to you too, Marcus. Don't play dumb. Helion Peak just pulled their entire contract. The email specifically mentions recent actions by senior leadership that violate partnership values. Brandon's locked in Jim's office. Legals running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And you called me because? Because the termination letter references intellectual property concerns and hostile work environment practices. That presentation, your presentation, it's all anyone can talk about. I kept my voice neutral. Sounds like Helion Peak has standards. Grace, did I what? Make Helion Peak suddenly develop a conscience? I've been unemployed for 4 days. Marcus, I don't have that kind of pull. He was quiet for a moment. Brandon's done, isn't he? I wouldn't know. Grace, I have to go. Good luck with the all hands. At 9 a.m. sharp, Helion Peak's press release went live. David Park had outdone himself. The headline was subtle devastation. Helion Peak terminates partnership with Voltrix Dynamics, cites misalignment with core values. The key quote from Max was surgical in its precision. At Helion Peak, we believe respect and integrity aren't just buzzwords, they're business imperatives. When a partner's actions demonstrate a fundamental disconnect from these values, we have a fiduciary duty to our stakeholders to seek alignment elsewhere. By 9:30, Bloomberg had picked it up. By 10, it was on Reuters. The stock market opened with Voltrix down 6%. Sarah's play-by-play continued. Jim just announced Brandon's resignation effective immediately. They're saying it's mutual. Mutual my ass. Security is boxing up his office. Wait, he's coming out. Then, a video. Shaky phone footage of Brandon being escorted out by security. His signature swagger replaced by something hollow. His silver hair looked disheveled. His designer suit somehow wrinkled. He clutched a banker's box like a life preserver. Mr. Kessler, any comment on the Helion Peak situation? Someone, probably an intern with more courage than sense, had asked. Brandon turned, and for a second, I saw it in his eyes. Confusion, rage, fear. This is a misunderstanding. We're addressing it. But there was no addressing a bullet that had already hit its target. By noon, the narrative had solidified. Financial blogs dissected Voltrix's toxic culture problem. A former employee posted a Medium article, Why I Left Voltrix, and my EI's Me Too story. The hashtag #YeSeeVoltrix values started trending, with current and former employees sharing their experiences. Patricia Henley, the CFO who'd watched Brandon steal my presentation, was quoted in an internal memo leaked within hours. We must acknowledge systematic failures in our leadership culture and commit to meaningful change. Translation: We got caught, and now we're in damage control. The final twist came at 2 p.m. An email from Jim Hartley himself, sent to all Voltrix employees and somehow immediately forwarded to me by 3 different people. Team, today, we face a moment of reckoning. The loss of the Helion Peak partnership is not just a financial blow. It's a mirror held up to our culture. Effective immediately. We are conducting a full review of all leadership practices, implementing mandatory equality and ethics training, establishing an anonymous whistleblower system, restructuring our communications department under new leadership. To those who have felt marginalized, overlooked, or disrespected, I apologize. We failed you. We will do better. To those who perpetuated a culture of discrimination, there is no place for you here. We will emerge from this stronger, more equitable, and worthy of the partners we seek to serve. Jim Hartley, CEO, Voltrix Dynamics. But the real satisfaction came from an unexpected source. At 3 p.m., my LinkedIn exploded with notifications. Brandon Kessler had updated his status, exploring new opportunities. 62 people had viewed his profile. 0 had reached out. Marcus called again. You know what the really fucked up part is? What's that? Brandon still doesn't know why this happened. He keeps asking everyone, why would Helion Peak care about one junior employee? What aren't you telling me? I thought about Max's prediction, about Brandon spending years wondering, but Marcus wasn't done. Grace, I owe you an apology. We all do. We saw what he did, and we said nothing. We let you fight alone. You had jobs to protect. That's an excuse, not a reason. He paused. For what it's worth, some of us are speaking up now. HR has 17 complaints as of an hour ago. Turns out you weren't the first, just the first to trigger consequences. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, watching the rain streak down windows. Somewhere across the city, Brandon Kessler was learning what it felt like to be disposable, to have your work, your worth, your whole career dismissed in a single morning. The number on my phone showed Voltrix had lost $47 million in market value by close of trading, all because one man thought he could steal from and humiliate someone he saw as nobody. $47 million. The price of disrespect. My uncle had been right about consequences needing to be meaningful. This certainly qualified. Tuesday morning brought sunshine and subpoenas. Brandon Kessler, it turned out, wasn't going quietly into corporate exile. His lawyers had filed a wrongful termination suit against Voltrix, claiming he'd been scapegoated for standard business practices. The discovery process, however, would prove to be his undoing. Sarah forwarded me the internal chaos. Legal just sent a company-wide notice about preserving all communications. Brandon's lawyers want everything: emails, Slack messages, even text records. He's claiming conspiracy. The conspiracy, of course, was Brandon's own behavior coming to light. Within days, the depositions began revealing a pattern so damning that Voltrix's lawyers reportedly begged for a settlement. Email after email surfaced, showing Brandon taking credit for subordinates' work, particularly women. The presentation theft wasn't an isolated incident, it was his management style. But the real satisfaction came from an unexpected source: the women Brandon had driven out over the years. They emerged from their professional diaspora with stories, documentation, and a shared hunger for justice. A former analyst named Jennifer Walsh had kept recordings of Brandon's performance reviews, where he'd told her she was too emotional for strategic thinking. Another, Lisa Park, had screenshots of Brandon presenting her entire product launch strategy as his own, down to her typos. By Thursday, Brandon's LinkedIn had gone dark. The Exploring New Opportunities tagline vanished, replaced by nothing. Industry insiders whispered that he'd been blacklisted from every major firm in Boston. One recruiter told Marcus that Brandon's name was radioactive. Anyone who hired him would face questions about their own culture. I watched this unfold from my apartment, sending out resumes for new positions but feeling strangely detached from the urgency. Something Max had said kept echoing. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming who they tried to prevent you from being. Friday afternoon, Voltrix announced a complete restructuring of their communications department. The new creative director, Patricia Henley, the CFO who'd watched Brandon steal my work. Her first official act was to implement a transparent attribution system for all creative work. Her second was to reach out to every employee Brandon had terminated or driven away. Grace, her email read, "I know this comes too late, but Voltrix owes you an apology and an opportunity. The door is open if you ever want to return." I stared at that email for a long time. The vindication was sweet. They were essentially admitting wrongdoing, but returning felt like moving backward. My phone buzzed. Uncle Max. "Not even considering it," I said without preamble. He chuckled. "Good. I have a better offer. Remember that CSR initiative I mentioned? I need someone to run it, someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated. Interested?" "Nepotism doesn't look good on anyone, Uncle Max." "You're. It's not nepotism if you're the most qualified candidate. You've got a decade of communications experience and a very personal understanding of why corporate culture matters. Plus," his voice took on that dangerous edge again, "I think you've proven you understand power dynamics better than most." He was right. Watching Brandon's downfall had taught me more about corporate leverage than any MBA program could. Power wasn't just about titles or salaries, it was about understanding the invisible networks that really ran things. What would the role involve? Building communication strategies for our diversity and inclusion initiatives, working with portfolio companies to establish better cultures, and occasionally, he paused, identifying organizations that might benefit from losing our partnership. "You want me to be your corporate culture executioner? I want you to be my chief advocate for workplace equity. If that occasionally requires executing toxic cultures, so be it." The offer was everything I'd been unconsciously moving toward, a role where I could prevent other Graces from facing other Brandons, where I could use power to dismantle the very systems that had tried to diminish me. That evening, I met Sarah for drinks at our usual spot in Back Bay. She was giddy with insider updates. "You'll never guess who applied for a job today," she said, sliding into the booth. "Brandon fucking Kessler. Applied for a mid-level position at a startup in Worcester. They called Voltrix for references. And Jim Hartley himself took the call. 10 minutes later, the startup CEO called Brandon personally to say the position had been filled. I sipped my wine, feeling something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, something cooler, more final. "He'll never work in Boston again," Sarah continued. "Hell, probably not anywhere in the Northeast." Word is he's looking at moving to Arizona. Starting over. At 40-something, with a reputation in ruins and a LinkedIn profile that might as well be a scarlet letter. All because he'd thought one junior employee was disposable. Do you feel bad? Sarah asked, studying my face. I considered the question. Brandon had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his career trajectory. The financial hit from legal fees alone would probably wipe out his savings. He'd gone from corner office to untouchable in less than a week. No, I said finally. I feel balanced. Like the scales finally evened out. Sarah raised her glass. To balance, then, and to Helion Peak's newest Senior Director of Strategic Communications and Cultural Initiatives. How did you— Girl, please. Max Elwood's niece takes down a toxic boss, and suddenly Helion Peak creates a new position focused on workplace equity. The math isn't hard. We clinked glasses, and I thought about all the women who'd been forced out of their careers by men like Brandon. How many had suffered in silence, without an Uncle Max to level the playing field? My new role would be about them, about creating systems where power protected merit instead of crushing it. Brandon Kessler had taught me an invaluable lesson. In corporate America, being right wasn't enough. You needed power, leverage, and the willingness to use both. Thanks to him, I now had all three. 6 months later, I sat at the same waterfront cafe where I'd once nursed my post-termination humiliation. The November wind off Boston Harbor was sharp, but I barely felt it. My laptop was open to the email that had started everything, Brandon's termination notice, which I'd saved in a folder labeled Lessons. The coffee shop was nearly empty at this hour, just me and a few other early risers stealing moments before the corporate machine demanded their attention. I opened a new message from a woman named Diana Chen, a senior analyst at a tech firm in Cambridge. Ms. Elwood, I heard you speak at the Women in Business conference last week. I'm facing a situation similar to what you described. My boss just presented my algorithm optimization as his breakthrough. HR says without proof, there's nothing they can do. I'm wondering if you have any advice. These emails came daily now. Women, and increasingly men, who'd been bulldozed by corporate bullies, reaching out because they'd heard about the Voltrix incident. The story had become something of a legend in Boston business circles, the junior employee who triggered a $47 million loss and a complete corporate restructuring. They didn't always know about Uncle Max. That revelation had eventually leaked, as he'd predicted. But by then the narrative was established. A toxic executive had stolen from and fired the wrong person, and the universe had responded accordingly. I closed Diana's email, making a note to respond personally. Each story mattered. Each person deserved to know they weren't alone in fighting systems designed to diminish them. My phone buzzed. A Google alert for Brandon Kessler. I'd kept it active out of curiosity more than anything. This one made me pause. Former Voltrix executive opens leadership consulting firm in Phoenix. I clicked through to a sparse website. Brandon's headshot looked older, grayer. His bio mentioned extensive experience in corporate communications, but notably omitted his Voltrix tenure. The service offered authentic leadership training for modern workplaces. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Brandon Kessler, teaching authenticity, teaching leadership. I wondered if he'd learned anything or if this was just another performance, another theft, this time stealing the language of the very movements that had destroyed him. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to send the link to every woman he'd ever undermined. But mostly, I felt nothing. Brandon had become what he'd tried to make me, irrelevant. I closed the laptop and watched the harbor wake up. Boats cutting through pewter water. The first commuter ferries loading with people heading to jobs where they'd fight their own Brandons. The cycle would continue, but maybe with slightly better odds. My work at Helion Peak had already triggered 3 major contract terminations with companies that failed our cultural audits. Each time, the message was clear. Respect wasn't negotiable. Each time, stock prices reflected the cost of toxicity. The market, it turned out, could be a powerful ally when properly motivated. You look thoughtful, a voice said. I glanced up to find Patricia Henley, Voltrix's reformed leadership now running a transformed department. We'd developed an unexpected friendship over the months, bonded by the shared experience of watching Brandon's implosion. Just reading about our friend's new venture, I said, showing her my phone. Patricia laughed, sharp and bright. Authentic leadership? That's bold, though I suppose reinvention is very American. Do you think he's changed? She considered this, settling into the chair across from me. I think he learned that actions have consequences. Whether that translated to actual growth? She shrugged. Phoenix is about to find out. We sat in comfortable silence. Two women who'd survived the corporate battlefield and emerged with scars and power in equal measure. Patricia had turned Voltrix's communications department into a model of transparent attribution. I'd helped Healy and Peak become the corporate world's ethical enforcer. Neither role had existed before. Brandon's cruelty created the need for them. You know what the strangest part is? I said eventually. I almost want to thank him. Without Brandon, I'd probably still be fighting for scraps of recognition in someone else's empire. Still believing that if I just worked harder, proved myself more, eventually merit would win. Instead, I learned that merit without power is just potential energy. You need both to create real change. Patricia raised her coffee cup. To Brandon Kessler, then, may he stay in Phoenix. I touched my cup to hers, but my mind was already moving forward. There were more Dianas out there, more stolen presentations, more careers crushed by ego. The work was far from over. But for now, in this moment, I allowed myself the small satisfaction of knowing that Brandon Kessler, the man who'd thought I was disposable, had inadvertently created his own replacement. Every contract I terminated, every toxic culture I helped dismantle, every woman I empowered to fight back. It all traced back to that conference room where he'd stolen my work and called me sweetheart. He thought he was trimming fat. Instead, he'd forged a weapon. I finished my coffee and headed to the office, my real office, with windows and respect and the power to ensure no one would ever call me disposable again. As I walked, I thought about Uncle Max's chess lessons, about thinking 3 moves ahead. Brandon had played checkers in a chess world. He'd taken my piece off the board without considering what would happen next, without realizing that in this game, a captured pawn could return as a queen. The thought made me smile as I pushed through Healy and Peak's doors. Somewhere in Phoenix, Brandon Kessler was trying to rebuild his life. And here in Boston, I was making sure there would be fewer men like him to rebuild from. He'd called me nobody. Turned out, nobody could be very dangerous indeed. Morning, Ms. Elwood, the security guard said. Morning, James. Busy day ahead. I thought about Diana's email, about the 3 meetings scheduled to review potential partner companies, about the speech I was giving at Harvard Business School next week on power, privilege, and corporate accountability. Just the usual, I said. Changing the world, one Brandon at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever faced a Brandon in your workplace? How did you handle it? Your stories matter, and I'd love to hear them in the comments.